is Catherine Ross, and I'm, in my day job, the Chief Scientific Officer for Scottish Government and Head of Profession for the Scientific Workforce in the NHS in Scotland, but also have the privilege to be a trustee of the Science Council. We have another phenomenal panel with us this afternoon, and I'm just going to briefly introduce them, and it will take the same format as we've had already today. But I think what we've already seen today is just the importance of having a really sustainable approach to providing a strong scientific workforce across the UK. And actually there's more that we need to do, and I think we're going to hear some of that in our next panel. So I'm going to introduce our panel. I'm going to start off with Frances Burstow. Frances is the Director of Talent and Skills at UKRI. She has responsibility for leading the strategic development of UKRI's approach to talent and skills and the transition to working in a collective manner across all of its £2 billion of talent initiatives. In her previous role, she was Deputy Director for Skills and Methods at ESRC. We also have Danny Croucher with us. Danny is the Policy Lead for Skills and Talent at NCUB. And she works with members in government to level up on the innovation workforce. And she joined NCUB from the Institute of Physics, where we are today, and how we've heard so many of the Institute of Physics, where she led the policy across R&D, education, and diversity and inclusion. And finally, we have Dr. Jane Williams, Deputy Director at Go Science, and she currently leads Go Science's Security, Resilience and Strategy division, which provides science advice to the Prime Minister on issues of national importance. So I'm sure you will agree with me, another very impressive panel. I'm not going to hold us up any further. I'm going to pass across to Frances first. Thank you very much, Frances.
Thank you, Catherine, and good to be here today. As you said, I'm Director of Talent and Skills for UKRI, and I work collaboratively across the councils to develop our collective talent strategy. And cross-sector mobility is an area where we already have a number of collective investments and interventions, also where we're exploring how we can strengthen and extend those. And the reason we're doing that, my slide, is that we believe it's critical to achieving a dynamic and connected research and innovation system, which is needed to address the multifaceted, complex social and economic challenges we face. Despite the UK's research strengths and world-leading innovation status, successive reviews, most recently the NERSE review, have really highlighted that we need to strengthen the connections between the different pillars of the research system. And we believe career path diversity and mobility is absolutely key to creating those connections, so that people and their movement through the system is a way of building connectivity. This helps bridge silos and encourages creativity and knowledge exchange. And I think it really helps support the application of research and helps us speak the same language across those different boundaries. We recently commissioned NCUB, and my colleague is here today, to undertake a mobility task force to look at this issue in more detail. And I think that work and what Danny's going to talk about in more detail in a minute really articulates the economic case for mobility as well. So we're really thinking about how do we encourage and remove those barriers for collaboration, and that's both through our funding interventions, but also our work as a policy and advocacy organisation. So in terms of our approach, again, straddling those functions, we've really focused on 5 key things. And I think the journey that we want to be on is moving from a situation which in parts will sound very familiar, hopefully we're making progress, but where we have more of a reputation economy, which is very much focused on only proper academics matter, who follow a particular path, who are publishing in particular journals. And so we want to move to a position where we have parity of esteem between different groups and staff and different parts of the system, where the diversity of contributors and contributions matter, where we see far more diverse and flexible career pathways through the R&I system, and where we're really welcoming of a diverse range characteristics and backgrounds. And I was quite surprised today when I came, and that the last panel I joined, we had 3 women speakers working in STEM AI, and we've got a panel of women as well today. But I think what we know is that's not necessarily representative of the broader system, and we see a lack of diversity in other characteristics as well. And then the final point is just really supporting people to understand that wider context of their work, so that they can move out the potential dangers of a more tunnel vision, potentially through disciplinary silos, and have that creativity be inspired by working with others as well. So we've been really thinking about how do we support those career pathways that do that. What I've got here is just an overview of some of the specific ways in which we're doing that. And that can be through very specific talent-focused investments and initiatives. And I've just given a few examples of those there. One that's particularly at the forefront of our minds at the moment is how we support postgraduate research training, and that's because we're leading on a new deal for postgraduate research. We published our response last month, and that particularly talked about how we wanted to, at the very earliest stage, encourage students to think in a very diverse way about the careers that were open to them, really think about the transferability of their skills, and take up as many opportunities as they could to spend time in different environments through placements and internships. You'll then see things which might be more traditional features of our funding landscape as well, which is future leader fellowships. We're now doing increasing policy fellowships with government. We have some new explorative way of funding, so flexible talent and mobility awards, which one of the councils offers, which gives real flexibilities to organisations to think about how they support movement. We then have support that's actually embedded in our wider investment portfolio, to particularly highlight, because they're really thinking about how we support postdocs to think about different career paths, is Prosper and CIDIS, which is the Postdoc Cities Centre for Postdoctoral Development Infrastructure and Cities, which is really about cohort-based training and development for postdoc researchers, which are really thinking about how they can change the culture around what their career is going to be. And then the final area is around policy and advocacy. And I mentioned the NCUB report, and that's part of our desire to help build the evidence base about the types of mobility we see, what works, what doesn't work, what might be the most effective way of scaling up our provision. And Danny will be able to talk to some of the findings from that. There are other things that we've been working through, piloting the resume for research, which is about how do we recognise the diverse range of contributions that people can bring to research. And I think the things that have been most in the media, particularly at the moment, is some of the changes that we're bringing to Ref 28 and how we hope that might create an environment where, with the incentives and rewards, encourage the type of mobility that we're looking to see. So the final slide is just saying, and hopefully this will be an area where we can maybe discuss as part of the question and answer session, is we are still very much developing our understanding of what works. What we do know is that actually we have some spots of the research and innovation community where mobility is more difficult and more challenging. I've highlighted on this slide mid-career researchers. I could have easily as well put postdoctoral researchers. So thinking about how we most effectively support those groups. For us, can we do more to include it in our day-to-day funding, so in our major funding programmes as an embedded part? And then I think finally we'll probably, through the discussions, not just focus on what UKRI does, but we're part of a broader landscape, and how do we coordinate and make a more easily accessible and coherent offer for the sector. So thank you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Francis. It's great to hear that mobility has been something that's been spoken about already so much across the day. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit about the mechanisms to actually deliver this. I think we've seen that there are huge skills gaps across the economy, and in coming years they'll grow. This is just one way in which we can do more with the people that we have already in the system to be able to deliver against some of the metrics that we have. So first off, I want to introduce the task force, and we worked with some amazing people across the sector to look at this, to look at the idea of kind of research and mobility, or porosity as some of you might know it, holistically. So big thanks to everybody on the screen, and Francis as well, who was our observer from UKRI for delivering this. We came together with 6 leaders from universities, 6 leaders from businesses, to work out exactly what are the benefits of research and mobility, how much of it's done, why do we need to do it more, do we need to do it more, and what can that really do for our economy and skills issues. So within that, we realised that there wasn't a huge amount of evidence gathered in this area. So we developed 3 evidence strands, which in the end led to 3 evidence reports, as well as a policy report. So we worked with economists across UKRI, DCIT, and our internal kind of economics team to look at 3 data sources. That was from both the RNI Workforce Survey that's run by DCIT, and some work we did looking at business motivation for engaging with universities a few years ago with the University of Cambridge, as well as experimental data from ORCID and LinkedIn. We then had a second strand where we interviewed 30 individuals, so 30 researchers from across sectors, 30 universities and 30 businesses, to understand why people move sectors, what the benefits are, what the barriers are for doing that. And then again, a third strand working with Technopolis Group, looking at all of the schemes that we have in the UK, of which there are quite a lot, really, really good, and also to see those overseas that enable mobility, to be able to work out what are the best ones and how we can learn from them. So I'm going to launch straight into the key findings without going into more on the methodology, because you can see each of those evidence reports are already published. But what we found, and principally what we wanted to do, was look at all the different ways that you can do this. So we've made a taxonomy of research mobility, and it's fairly simple in that there's effectively 3 ways that people can move sectors. You have the classic, I'm leaving my role and I'm going to somewhere different, very binary, a kind of permanent move. But you also have people who go on time-bound, kind of secondment-based mobility types, often in KTPs, and they kind of create networks as they do that. And then a third type who are kind of innovative, and often the consultants who have multiple roles and go between places and organisations as they do that. And this is an important distinction, because those 3 types each need different support to be able to get the most out of the mobility that they do and the pathways that they take. So we also wanted to make a real clear case for why this is important and why this is a really good, basically incentivise this for the sector to be able to improve our skills capability. So I've listed here some of the key benefits of mobility, and you can see there it's kind of improved diversity of thought for both businesses and universities. And we did look at just businesses and universities, but this could be kind of the case across sectors where staff move between roles. The cutting edge knowledge improves access to so many different things. So the knowledge you have, the skills base that you have, the infrastructure that you have, and also builds teams and skills and capacities within teams. So there's a real economic case benefit for universities and businesses, but also huge reasons why researchers themselves would and could do this and get some benefits as well. So that's improving their own skills, their experiences and opportunities that they gain from this are absolutely huge. The networks that they build will impact them across their career. And we also found evidence of greater impact from their research. So it goes beyond just their own kind of personal day-to-day experiences. But we do know that there's an opportunity for us to do better. So we know it's a good thing. We know that it's something that's important for us to look at. If you see on the slide here, there's 20%, and that's the UK. That figure effectively is the proportion of researchers who are in academia who've previously been in an industry role. You can see that's lower than quite a few of the other European countries. And there's definitely scope for us to do this more. And you can also see we looked at the direction of mobility and then tracked that by age. Age here we're using as a proxy for kind of career stage. So we know it doesn't always marry, but it kind of is a rough idea. We can see that actually mobility generally happens inwards to academia as opposed to going outwards into industry, which means we're losing out on some of those benefits in industry of academic skills. And we know it drops off across career stage. So a lot of those key skills that academics have later in career are not being accessed or maximised within industry roles. So there's a lot of data that underpins those key findings, and there's a huge number of opportunities for us to be able to improve that picture to create a more porous research landscape. And some of these we've sought to address through a number of recommendations, and I'll kind of talk to a few of those now. So rewarding and acknowledgement for mobility is a key thing we think could be a real key to solving this puzzle. I think effectively you cannot apply to a role that doesn't recognise the expertise and the credentials you have and have gained in another sector. So just effectively broadening our understanding of what other people do and valuing those skills would be a real way to be able to encourage other people with other kind of expertise to come into your sector. Awareness and communications. This is interesting because it can always look like careers advice, but actually we know that a lot of the researchers in our sector aren't aware of the opportunities to them, and this has a huge EDI implication. Often the people who do know the opportunities are the people who always will. So there's a risk of exclusion here, and we know that mobility can be seen as really high risk as well. It can be seen as a one-way move. So if we work to de-risk this with better awareness, it's something that we'll be able to kind of effectively open up so everyone will be able to access the opportunities to do research in all environments. We also found we have a huge number of mobility schemes, and we're very well known for them. We have some of the best mobility schemes globally in kind of other reviews that have been done internationally. Often these are done basically funded by UKRI, the national academies. Some are just run between partnerships that we have between universities and businesses, and they kind of give that's all sorts of types of mobility. So quite often KTP, sometimes it's secondments, etc. But we found in some of the research that actually the longer that these run for, the more repute they gain, and the more successful they are. So there's something definitely in here around scaling up our support for mobility schemes, promoting them better, opening them up to more people, so that we're better able to use the assets that we already have. And lastly, I think agreeing a definition to systemize mobility. So I spoke a little bit about how often people aren't aware of the benefits of mobility, that they can be mobile across sectors, or that it's something that we actually do want them to do. But if everybody kind of agrees one mobility definition, if that moves into organisational objectives, then it's something they can actually use and harness and make a strategy for to be able to deliver. So we have a lot of recommendations. They're split into 3 sections effectively, 2 asks of governments and funders to make the system more mobile for our workforce by design, 2 directed at universities and businesses and effectively all players in the innovation workforce to make their own processes more porous to enable people to move in and out of their roles. And also, interestingly, you don't see usually in policy work recommendations to individual researchers themselves to go out and take the opportunities that are there, which felt like a nice thing to add into a policy report. So there's a huge amount in there, and it's all published now, and I'm sure we'll go into it in some of the questions, but with that, thank you.
Dangerous tightrope walk across the front of the stage. Hello, everybody. Really nice to be here today. I'm Jane Williams. I'm a Deputy Director at GoScience. For those that don't know a lot about GoScience, we're about providing science advice and science advice mechanisms into government to be able to speak truth to power and ensure that science advice is embedded in government policy. We're also home of the government science and engineering profession, which I've been a member of for a few years. But actually, that's not the team in GoScience that I lead. I actually lead their security, resilience and strategy division in GoScience. And we deliver some of the key advice into government, including through the Prime Minister's Council for Science and Technology, and also the Science and Technology Advisory Group for Emergencies, so SAGE, which became, I guess, commonly known during COVID. And both of those groups actually draw in advice and expertise from outside government to inform those government decisions, both in kind of what we would call peace times, but also but in times of crisis. And through that really sort of, I guess, helping cross-sector mobility in that way too. And actually government has a network of around 100 different department-sponsored science advisory councils and committees that support this kind of collaboration and information exchange between those entities outside government and those inside government, and also has a range of chief scientific advisors who generally come from outside of government and on fixed term contracts within government. I'm going to share with you today some of the initiatives that GSE has been working on to support cross-sector mobility. But first of all, I thought I'd start by telling you a bit about my career, because actually I've worked in my career mainly cross-sector, which I think is probably gives a different perspective, but I definitely recognise a lot of what Danny was saying from my own kind of personal experience. So I started my career in academia. I did a PhD. I then did a number of postdocs on kind of agriculture and medical research. And then I moved into industry and spent some time in medical diagnostics companies, developing diagnostic tests for the medical and food industry. And then came to government, where even in government, I've worked across lots of different departments, from MOD to Home Office to Health, to most recently GoScience. And actually, I really value that career path that I've taken, and I've come to realise actually that not that many people in government have have experience of that full breadth of different sectors. And I think the skills that you learn outside and inside government are really transferable, and you just kind of have to apply them in different ways for different roles. So that the skills that I learned in academia and industry, such as experimental design, hypothesis testing, writing grant proposals, presenting at conferences, board meetings, trade shows, have since translated into things like policy design, actually not that different to experimental design in many ways, and things like writing submissions, presenting to ministers. Actually, it's all transferable. The biggest difference I actually found moving cross-sector was the different drivers of the organisations that I worked for. So in academia, we heard previously around the drive for publications. In industry, being very profit and competitor driven. I worked for a very big American company, so that was quite a challenge, just translating over to that. And then in government, being, I guess, more focused on the public good. But I think this experience has really allowed me to be able to, from within government, engage credibly cross-sector. And actually, many of my roles in government have ended up having that kind of external focus because of that. So working at the Defence and Security Accelerator, for example, as their operations lead, my role was all about how you bring ideas in from outside of government, particularly with small and medium-sized enterprises and academia into government to help develop new capabilities. But what I would say actually is this career path wasn't actually an easy one to take. Starting in government, I pretty much had to start my career again. My experience wasn't really recognised at that time. So again, kind of recognising what Danny was talking about. But actually, at the moment, we're in a period of rapid technological change, primarily driven by science and technology outside of government. And therefore, we really need to be able to work cross-sector in order to stay ahead of our competitors. And if we really want to be a UK S&T superpower, science superpower, then we really need to be able to do this. We can't be insular, we'll get overtaken. So we really need people who can work cross-sector or who can work collaboratively across the sectors to take our ideas through to something that's actually real. I'm now just going to talk about some of the wider initiatives actually from the GSE perspective that we have been working on to support cross-sector mobility. The first is our STEM's Futures scheme. And you may have heard Angela McLean, who's my boss, talking about this morning in her keynote. So this is a cross-sector knowledge exchange scheme. It brings together 27 partners from the public sector, academia and industry. And it works by facilitating secondments, mentoring, training, shadowing, mainly through communities of interest centered around key technology areas. So I know you were talking about AI before this session, so AI being one of them, quantum being another. And we've more recently started to develop some guest lecture series around each of these themes, so the themes in the hubs are really growing. The scheme itself is growing. We recently welcomed the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology and the Department for Transport onto the scheme, and we continue to welcome expressions of interest from new partners across all of the sectors to join. And we'll be expanding our technical areas over the next year, and also looking at how we integrate across the technological areas with the policy areas as well. So moving on to the GSE careers framework. So this is really helping to facilitate the movement of people into government from outside, trying to outline the skills, knowledge and experience you need to be a scientist or an engineer in government. It demonstrates all the possible careers that are available for GSE people within government, grouping them into 4 different job families, from affiliate to cross-discipline, specialist and deep specialist, to cover the range of career paths available. It provides case studies so people can kind of see examples of where people have worked cross-sector, and supports line managers in being able to recruit in a more diverse way by considering the transferable skills that are available across the system. The third is professional recognition. So GSE supports its members in order to pull together the evidence required to become registered, chartered, or to continue their professional development through 9 different science and engineering professional organisations, including the Science Council. It helps its members to recognise their transferable skill sets and experience and enables them to benchmark them across the different sectors. And being connected to a professional body then allows people access to lots of different networking opportunities, expert talks, collaboration opportunities, training and workshops, again, all supporting mobilisation. The fourth and final GSE scheme that I'll talk about is the Royal Society Pairing Scheme. So this is a long-standing event that the GSE profession supports in collaboration with the Royal Society. It's a cross-government and cross-sector scheme that aims to bring together policymakers with scientists and engineers. And each year, 30 research scientists or engineers are paired with UK parliamentarians and civil servants. Over a week, they take part in workshops, go on visits, hear from invited speakers and spend time in their pair. The MP, peer or civil servant then is invited back to the scientist home institution to find out more about their work. There are also networking opportunities to work across the different pairs as well, so you learn about what's happening with your cohort as well. Civil servants obviously gain insights to what it's like to work in academia and understand the challenges that academia thereby faces in working with government. And likewise, scientists and engineers gain an insight in how their research can inform policy and the ways to be able to do that. Applications are now open for the scheme, which will run in March 2024. Finally, I'm just going to talk about 2 new government schemes. They're outside of GoScience, but they're relatively new, just to flag them. The first is the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office Technical Secondment Scheme. So that launched this month. It's facilitating outward secondments by technically focused diplomats in the UK into tech sector organisations. It's intended to obviously deepen the links between FCDO and the tech sector. And the second is the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, so DSIT's Expert Exchange Programme. So earlier this year, DSIT announced the creation of this Expert Exchange Programme. It's focused initially on bringing secondees in, but it's very much intended to be a 2-way process with DSIT civil servants also undertaking placements out in industry to get a better understanding of the sectors that they work with. And so far, the first inward secondees have spoken very positively about their experiences to date and getting hands-on experience with policymakers. And I'm going to stop there. So thank you very much for listening and looking forward to the questions. Thank you.
Start by thanking each of our panelists so far, just in terms of the breadth that we have the opportunity to discuss this afternoon. I think we all recognise that our scientists bring some significant skills and talents into their roles, but actually this is about one of the skills and talents that we need to provide them with to enable that mobility, and we've heard about from industry and academia, but actually even in government, and Angela touched on that this morning. So I think that gives us a significant scope for discussion in terms of actually what are the transferable skills that we see that we have inherently as scientists, but actually perhaps that we need to market better, and then what are the skills that we have in less significant quantities, and how do we have a mechanism to develop and to support the breadth of those. So I'm going to open up the floor first for questions, because I suspect there were quite a lot of questions, and again I can't see anyone who's in the corner.
Sorry to interrupt you. You're so quietly spoken. Would you mind standing close to the mic? It's just not picking you up fully. So, perfect.
I think that's the first time anyone has ever told me I'm very quietly spoken. Thank you so much. I usually get told the opposite, so hopefully this isn't too loud, so I'll start speaking really quietly again. Questions or comments from the floor? Question there. Thank you.
Hi, Joseph from LifeArc. Just on the NCUB report, it looks fantastic and well done. And I apologise for asking questions. When you do a big report and then someone asks about something that wasn't in the scope, I can imagine that's a bit annoying. But and maybe partly just for clarification as well. So a lot of the movement in the bar charts was kind of between academia and business. Did you include kind of to charities and to government and kind of other organisations as well?
Yeah, we had a lot back and forth on that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, no, and it's feels particularly sad for me because I used to work at NPL, so a government lab, and I was like, I think this is, they're all pillars of the ecosystem here. We're talking about the same researchers who need the same skills. They also are part of the picture. Unfortunately, the scope of NCB is the U and the B. So that work was just limited to that, but I would absolutely love to see more work done looking at the wider picture. And I think a lot of the findings will hold true for those other parts of the ecosystem.
I think just to say, I mean, the schemes that I talked about and the things that we're doing within UKRI very much include increasing mobility across the full range of boundaries. And I think you gave some examples of where we're collaborating with government. We've got a new policy fellowship scheme that's working across government that's led by ESRC. So yeah, it's very much in our consciousness, and I think we've got some pieces of work which speak that there's a lot of synergies between issues and challenges, regardless of where we're moving.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I mean, having worked across those three sectors, I'd obviously be really I was really interested actually to see the movement from industry to academia being higher. I would have predicted the other way around. So I was really interested to see that. Yeah.
From a government perspective, do we see men scientists who come into government but actually who stay in government? Because there's a significant challenge with the skills and expertise that our scientists have to progress in that civil service, and Angela touched on it slightly this morning.
Yeah.
But you know, we can attract them in, but can we retain them? And is there something that we need to do more to give them the skills on par with our, I guess, career civil servants to compete in that landscape?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is something that Angela is really passionate about, and one of the things she's come in as a priority to do. She'd like to see, you know, half of the, at least the senior civil service being have a scientific background versus an arts background. So I think there's a number of things. I think it's understanding those transferable skills, because they are transferable. I think, as I said, I think experimental design and policy making, gathering evidence to come to conclusions, to you know, put forward a proposal, they're kind of very similar. People don't see them in that way. So I think it's recognising those transferable skills and rewarding those the kind of scientific approach to them, valuing that scientific approach to them would be a good way to support that going forward.
It sounds like a little bit like your questions just structured another piece of work that perhaps extends into other spheres.
That graph, I like that graph a lot because it shows the picture isn't exactly how there's a real perception that we're losing all of our best talent to industry, etc. But I think what it doesn't show is how many people move across their career back and forth. And what we really want is that we don't want someone to move once and it be at whatever stage of your career you are. We want to kind of manage to flip that graph to show.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, actually, I think so I'm from the Royal Astronomers, I would say in our sector, primarily is a move out of academia because there aren't enough posts, and that's always been accepted. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. You know, in fact, I think it's a very good thing because they're taking their skills out. And there's always I think there's still work to do around that, not being seen as a kind of failure that you don't secure a post. I was going to make a point about an observation about the kind of high levels of mobility between sectors and so on, whether there's sort of a bit of an EDI issue there as well, which is that you get a certain degree of security of rights, and I'm thinking things like parental maternity leave. If you stay long enough in the post, if you're in a very short-term thing, then you might be seen that as more of a risk. You know, I'm just wondering if that's a factor in preventing some of those moves as well. This is just speculation, by the way. I don't really. You can tell me whether that's right.
Of course. Well, I sat in most of the interviews with researchers, so when they said, "Oh, I did move or I didn't move because of these factors," some of those things came up. I mean, we know there's the kind of precarity of contracts in a lot of academic posts, particularly early in career, which is why I think sometimes you do get the push to industry early at that point. But there's a whole host of factors. Often they are EDI relevant. So I think that's why one of our large conclusions was if we get this definition embedded in strategy, and then we're able to basically account for those things to be able to offer our researchers, to be able to de-risk it and offer them the wraparound support they need to be able to do this safely. Well,
I think we're just very conscious that mobility is a lot harder for some groups due to their personal circumstances. And if I just gave the example of at the doctoral stage, it sounds like it's a career stage where it should be more easy, but we know for those with caring responsibilities, those who are less mobile geographically, it's a lot harder. So we could be thinking about how we can support that and bring flexibility into some of the ways in which people have the ability to work across sectors. And some of that is really helped by what we've learned through COVID about how we can work more virtually in more hybrid ways. So that's been a benefit, and we've seen people being able to participate.
Any questions?
Sorry, just to add to that, I was just going to say one more thing. I think probably controversially, it may not always be about mobility as well. It may be about how you create environments for co-creation of different activities where people can remain in their existing role, but you can work really collaboratively with people within another sector. Because I think there's lots of barriers culturally and structurally to being able to do that at the moment. And actually, if we can do some of those barriers, perhaps people don't actually need to move to be able to get the ideas from one sector into another.
Sort of building, by the way, I'm Joseph, I'm from the Institution of Environmental Sciences. Building on that specifically, to what extent are we using targeted secondments to say, not you'll go and do something for the benefit of this organisation, but you'll go and learn things which will then be useful when you come back to us as well? To what extent is that something that is happening?
So that is definitely being considered through the various schemes that I talked about, the secondment schemes that I talked about. It's about people's career journey and learning for them and the wider UK kind of ecosystem as it is about for the business itself. So that is being taken into consideration for the different schemes.
Question, gentleman there, and then the lady in front.
Hi, Henry Lovett from the Royal Society of Chemistry. This one's mostly for Jane. I think you talked about the ambition to get more science representation within the civil service, which is a noble one that I support wholeheartedly, but won't happen overnight. So what is going on to increase kind of attention paid to and respect afforded to scientific evidence from the bits that are already present in the civil service and the scientific method as applied to policy generation in general?
Yeah, this is something that Go Science it really really pushes for, and why we're in there actually is to get those underpinning underpinning scientific rigor within the system. So a lot of what my team do is actually looking at what other departments across government do and calling out where they're not applying the appropriate rigor to that. So we almost provide like an internal but independent look at what the rest of government is doing. For me, it's in the national security and resilience space, but other parts of Go Science are looking at different parts of that. So we're at that truth to power kind of holding that card up, and we've got Angela behind us being able to do that. And actually, departments are listening. So there was a department that I've been working with recently that did a study to look at how much of its policy development was underpinned by evidence, and actually some of the results showed that they needed to do better, and they are doing better because of that. So there's actually people are starting to look at their data in this space to ensure that policy is underpinned by evidence. And obviously the Windrush situation, has driven a lot of really careful consideration about policy development and thinking about the unintended consequences, drawing together the evidence. So I've seen definitely over the last, I'd say 3 years, a real push to make sure that policy is underpinned by evidence and scientific rigor.
May I have a follow-up? Of course. There's been reports in the news recently about potential changes to ministers having more involvement in the appointing of their senior civil servants. Is that a risk for the move that you're trying to bring about for impartial scientific advice and scientific representation in civil service?
So I think for me, another joy about working in Go Science is we don't report to a minister. So we can still provide, even if that happens, and I can't comment on that, it's a political decision, but even if that happens, Go Science will still be there driving for science and evidence to be underpinning government decision making.
Thank you, Caroline. Danny, I'm going to come back to one of your graphs. The one with the international comparison from the UK currently on the right-hand side. Do you get a sense of what is being done in terms of mobility in other countries and what's working well? And I suppose what effective practice we might learn from?
Yeah, of course. So that was the Technopolis work where they looked at all the different mobility schemes globally as well as in the EU. Not all of them, they kind of took a handful of those that were best practice. A lot of them haven't been evaluated, which is kind of a theme of we need to look at this a bit more closely and actually evaluate impact and then work out from there how we grow them, how we do this better. So that's where we got the kind of the longer they are running for, the more repute that they have, and the better they then are to recruit and actually work effectively. The particular slide you said was really interesting because without having it up on the screen again, if you see the countries that were the highest were actually some of the smaller and least research heavy nations. And there's various kind of theories around this. Some of them kind of just thought internally is other kind of less specialized roles. Does that kind of lower activity mean that you are more able? And does that kind of just naturally mean that where we do a lot more science and a lot more specialized roles potentially mean that we're a lot more competitive once you're in them, you stay in them? And if that's a design of the system, that's a design of the system. But I think there's still something we can do there to be able to bring them a little bit closer together to make out on some of the opportunities within it.
I have a question there, which is workforce skills related. When you actually recruit researchers for your teams, where do they usually struggle? What kind of skills do they often lack, or perhaps what they could do to improve?
So was that what research skills are missing?
Yeah, well, when you actually recruit for various roles, when you recruit researchers, what kind of skills or where do they actually struggle when it comes to either applications or interviews?
Yeah. So we've got a couple of answers for you. So we know for postdocs, there's a good scheme that's out of Liverpool University, but now is nationwide, called Prosper. We know postdocs that are looking to move. Often employers said when they're kind of looking at their next step, they lacked the ability to kind of really articulate their own skills other than their own specialism of what they've done their postdoc on and their PhD before that and then their research before that. So there's definitely some sort of awareness, and they've got a 3-strand, and I might articulate it wrong, but it's something kind of a reflection of your own research and the skills that you have. Look around, build your own awareness, and actually build that ability to be able to evaluate your skills and gain more to apply to different avenues. But also when we spoke to universities and businesses as part of the research, businesses often said academics don't have people management, project management, program management skills, they can't communicate effectively. And academic institutions often said industry researchers don't publish papers. We know these things always come up. So I think there's different kind of ways to fixing both of those, and actually kind of bridging that divide of perception is one of the big ones. What's another question on this side? Over here?
Sorry. Oh, you go ahead. Was that okay? Thanks very much. So just a couple of points quickly. It's been a very interesting discussion. So it's interesting to hear the CSA's drive to create sort of 50-50 proportion of scientists and humanities and social scientists. But I think we then had a quick move to, yes, and we need more rigor to underpin policymaking and the evidence-based policymaking agenda. And I would just be a little bit careful about conflating those 2 points. Implying that somehow evidence-based and rigor only applies to natural sciences. So I'm actually here representing the BA today, but I'm also a PVC research at the University of Edinburgh. So I would be very cautious about that because, you know, there is a whole, you know, social science of evidence for policy, and, you know, most of the rigorous tools about evidence-based policy making come out of social science. I think we need a diversity of different disciplinary perspectives in government, but I wouldn't want to sort of, conflate rigor versus non-rigor and, you know, STEM versus shape. The other point was, it's interesting that we've got a revival of a kind of trend of evidence-based policy making, which we saw in the late 90s, and we've seen it's a cyclical trend in government and public management philosophies that we see come and go and ebb and flow. So I think, you know, almost building on that first point, we need to understand that also in historical perspective and why we never quite nail this. And obviously there are quite complex political dynamics behind that. It's you know, understanding the challenging relationship between research and science and policy making, and perhaps not going into this in too naive a way. But understanding, and I know Go Science doesn't, and you're very aware of those sorts of issues, and we're actually doing some research for CSD and for Go Science on this very topic at the moment. But I just felt I wanted to make that point.
Do we have time?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, the policy issue, that's absolutely critical. I wanted to take the discussion back to issues around diversity and inclusion, and to remind everybody that for some science PhD students, the issue isn't even cross mobility in terms of enhancing their career, but just linear mobility. Many of them just can't get a research tenureship. And there was a recent article in The Guardian, and I was struggling in vain to find it, and I couldn't find it, but it came out recently about Black PhD students who were saying that they applied for like 50 different jobs and they couldn't find anything. And one of the comments was when she asked why, when she has all this excellent research, why she wasn't chosen, the reply she got from the university is, we didn't think you'd be a good culture fit. So it's just, I just think there is some other core issues, you know, when we're talking about this sort of cross collaboration and the cross pollination of ideas and research, that we don't forget that actually there's some really core issues around implicit biases and stereotypes. And frankly, racism in academia, that's still creating barriers. And I think, you know, that's the elephant in the room that we're not addressing here today.
Thank you very much. I think we've had two very important statements made back to back. I just wonder, is it an opportunity for our panel to reflect on both of those?
I think just the next immediate one, I think it is really important to say, because I think unfortunately it is very much the case that we see that. And I think in addition to the challenges of having the precarity within academia, so when you talked about that not having that opportunity for tenure, for many postdocs it's seen as a complete failure if they move out with academia. So I think there's two elements there. There's the biases that we have within academia, which we all want to try and improve. There is also then this sense of failure for a very big group of our postdocs, and that's what Prosper, I think, particularly is really trying to, part of the investment we make there is really trying to change that culture as well.
Yeah, I'd say the parity of esteem issue, I see what you mean. It's kind of, it doesn't matter if you can't get on to the ladder anyway. But I think a large part of the work that we've done as part of the task force, that's people and culture strategy work, is around breaking the stereotypes and basically advocacy for culture change. And a lot of this comes back to research culture. And I think things like the narrative CV will go some way for that, but it's a huge issue.
Any other questions?
I had a question which is fairly selfish, but I hope it applies to other people in the room as well. So, because we're here for a Science Council event and there's lots of professional bodies, I'm hoping, in the room, what do you as a panel think that professional bodies could be doing better to support cross-mobility? Is there something, a service or an aspect of what they have traditionally provided or something they've never considered providing that could help support this for their members who make up a large part of the STEM workforce?
It's a very good question. Very, very good question.
Coming from someone who works for a professional membership organisation, Geological Society.
So we did talk about the fact there were gaps in skills and talent, and indeed, you know, our professional bodies and learning societies do have a role, or a potential role certainly, in supporting their scientists to plug some of those gaps. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, and I think it's also about the culture change as well, and demonstrating that it's valuable and it's actually something that you're recognising, it's an important part of the profession that you're representing, and I think that's really powerful. But also thinking about the connections that you can help foster as well. So I think there's three dimensions. You talked there about the skills and how you encourage those, but I think supporting that culture change and it not being a negative, it's a positive, that can bring that to life. And so as an organisation, you have connections which can support
I mean, I was actually going to say a similar point around culture. I think my last role was all about how you bring government, industry and academia together culturally, and you can't just say let's change culture. And I think it would be really helpful with some of to work with some of the professional bodies to understand how you can start to shift the culture in a certain direction, what are the things that you need to do, because I'm not sure that we really fully understand how to do it. There are ideas around, role modelling and how you reward different behaviours, but I think there's much more we could do around the cultural aspect. I think professional bodies would be great to help.
I want to add from a very sort of selfish perspective as well. I think sort of events such as this, where the professional bodies and learned societies come together under a much broader church, if you like, where there is that sort of cross-pollination of ideas. I think this has been a really good event from that sort of from the Science Council being able to convene quite a broad group of sectors into one room to discuss what have been incredibly challenging sort of topics, but which are exceptionally relevant to all of the member organisations and importantly to all of their members. I think there is probably something about how we stop working in silos, perhaps, and we consider actually what are the big challenges that our professional organisations need to address. How do we learn from the evidence that's being generated? And then how do we have big type events such as this to come up with some of those solutions? So I think this is a really good step in the right direction. I might be giving Rand some more work in terms of convening more topical conferences, but I think this idea of having such diverse thought in one room is incredibly powerful to come up with some of those solutions and work together. Go ahead.
Hi, sorry, I just love asking questions, but in the spirit of like throwing out ideas, I've got another question about the NCUB report, which is really like, if you could speak more about your experience of working with LinkedIn data. So I've often wondered whether LinkedIn or something like LinkedIn would be a really useful, quick way to help with some of this stuff in terms of the visibility of other career paths or other sectors, and even work that I've been involved in before with cross-sector mobility in terms of team science and going back to one of the earlier sessions, valuing the contributions of, for example, technicians as much as PIs. Is there a way to make better use of something like LinkedIn, so that if you're not the named person on the publication, it's still very clear that you've made a significant contribution to something and that you've got all this experience? So yeah.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and my data colleague is not here, so we'll start by that one. And I think the data question was a huge challenge, and I think we didn't realise how huge of a challenge it would be before we started. There is an entire report dedicated to it, and it's structured by method. So we did 3 or 4 different methods, we being my colleagues. And I remember thinking at the time, can't we kind of loop together the shared learnings? But actually, they were so different. The data was so experimental that they all did show different things. And that's because the data that we have isn't fully formed. And the immediate work that we've done from that is work on the R&I workforce survey and the JISC staff record with ESA data to try and build that more for future. The LinkedIn data in particular has huge potential. Currently is very exploratory, but if done right, I think it could be really good, and I could put you in contact with the guy who did it, and I believe they did also look at using ChatGPT for coding, which is cool. But that's probably as far as I know.
So in the absence of any further comments or questions to the panel, I'm going to give the panel an opportunity for your final thoughts and then sort of take away message for the audience.
I think for me, and the comment you made, sorry, I can't remember your name, I think it's about how we make mobility an opportunity for all, that we try and avoid it being something that's really a specific group and who would traditionally probably been able to access it and are accessing now. How do we do it in a way that really brings in that diversity of people to have the opportunity?
I think across the sessions today, it's been a theme, and I kind of hadn't expected it to be something that's popped up so many times. I think we can see that as the needs of the sector are evolving, as technologies are evolving, we need more and more people with interdisciplinary skills, and this feels like a really good solution for that. I'd say we have just published this work, there's a clear agenda, it's a clear moment for us to build on this momentum, and we as NCUB are starting to think about what we do next with it, so looking forward to the beginning of the discussion.
I think for me, just thinking about how we can reduce some of those misconceptions. If you work in one industry, you might feel like it's almost impossible to go and work in just one if you've been in it for a long time, whereas the reality is it's not so different actually in terms of those key sort of underpinning skills, and how we bring out that messaging and help people to believe that they can go and apply for things in the interim sector and truly transfer their skills, and bring that diversity of thought into a different sector.
So it just falls to me to thank very much our panel this afternoon, to thank you all for the great questions and conversation, and to thank Brian for convening today's conference. We have a 10-minute break now, and then we're back into our final session of the afternoon.
20 minutes break.